nice meeting. Nice meeting. 170,000 members.
Okay. So in the session, we're going to start off just by giving a bit of kind of background context to what led to the development of the All-in Diary, and in particular looking at this issue of the importance of building local capacity and the importance of developing skills and knowledge locally. I think Jan's presentation before this has really underlined how important and significant that is. We're then going to take you on a bit of a journey to explain how the All-in Diary was developed and what's happened to it over the course of the last kind of 10 years. And then hopefully at the end we'll get a chance to get some observations and feedback from you in terms of how you think as a resource for the sector it could be further developed and where you feel we should be putting our energies. So starting off, just to give a bit of context, the issue and the importance of building local capacity isn't anything new. It's been around for many years, preceding the last decade, I'd say, but I think it really came to a fore in the aftermath of the tsunami in 2004, when there was a large multi-agency evaluation of the tsunami response. And one of the things that evaluation found was the degree to which a lot of international agencies had excluded local and national capacities in the way that they'd approached the response. And in some cases, that exclusion led to actually undermining capacities that there were on the ground, and at times leaving people actually more vulnerable than they were before the emergency. So that can be in terms of things like damage to livelihood opportunities through resettlement programs, damage to markets, or fueling conflict. So local capacity has a really, really important role to play in informing the way that the international community responds. Following on from the tsunami response, I think there was a lot of recognition in the sector that they had to improve, they had to do things better. And there was quite a lot of reform in terms of trying to find ways to actually incorporate capacity building, engage with local capacities more than had been done in the past. However, that kind of commitment and understanding was by far from universal. Some of the bigger agencies were beginning to recognise the importance, but in terms of smaller agencies, a lot of kinds of individuals that respond, that commitment simply wasn't there. And that really came to a fore and was highlighted with the earthquake in tsunami, where because of the sheer scale of the emergency, there were thousands of organisations that responded. No doubt many pop-up NGOs, but thousands of individuals as well, who all wanted to do their bit because the scale of need was so enormous. And so in the review of the response to Haiti, while people recognised that many of these organisations were very well-meaning, they lacked the degree of professionalism and knowledge that was needed to be effective on the ground. Moving on again from Haiti, there were continued, I think, efforts and continued commitment of resources across the sector to see what more could be done to improve the kind of level of professionalisation, improve the way in which people engage with local capacities. And then in the Philippines response, the evaluation from the Philippines really highlighted, not for the first time, but I think one of the exceptional things about the Philippines was it highlighted what a difference it makes when you have fairly reasonable levels of local and national capacity in disaster management and levels of preparedness at community level, because the response in the Philippines was different to many of the previous ones. The degree of coverage, I know Jan was talking about, reach, the ability to reach people, when you can't go in because of rules, because of regulations. But when you have local responders who have that reach, who have that understanding, and who are in a position to cover needs, it makes a huge difference. And similarly in the Philippines, the speed with which the response effort then translated into recovery for many communities in the Philippines was again unprecedented. But it's because they had a degree of skill and knowledge in order to push and move things forward themselves. But even in spite of that, again, in the evaluation of the Philippines response, there were still examples of where some international actors had bypassed national structures, national decision-making structures, because of the speed of having to respond. And I think that's a tension and a complexity that's always going to be there, getting this balance between the need to act quickly, but also the desire to involve local people. But these three emergencies, in a way, highlight three of the real drivers behind the concept of the All-In Diary. The first is around the need to engage people locally and create an enabling environment in which they can participate. The second is the importance of bringing experienced and less experienced people onto the same page. So combining the people who've got skills and expertise with the people that have got the heart and the drive and the will to do something. And then thirdly, and something that I think is very unique to the All-In Diary, and Linda will talk a lot more about that, is to keep things simple and practical and succinct. And in terms of kind of guidance and information, to make sure that it's provided in a media that means it's accessible to everybody and not just accessible to some. So those were some of the kind of key learning points that we've taken out of previous emergencies in developing the All-In Diary tool. And just in terms of, to recap, in relation to this challenge of building local skills, building local knowledge, there are lots of benefits, and I think these are highlighted from some of those emergency evaluations. Obviously, there's the benefit of extending the capacity for response. There's a benefit of making a faster transition from response to early recovery. There's also the benefit of reducing the amount of potential harm that can be done. The more local knowledge, the more local engagement there is in decision making, the less risk there is of doing harm. Also in terms of empowerment, the more involved local people are, both in terms of disaster response, but in terms of wider issues like things like economic opportunities, social opportunities, the more empowering it'll be. And then overall, this will all contribute to developing better resilience on the ground. The more local people understand about things like risk reduction and disaster preparedness, again, it makes communities much more resilient in facing the next emergency. So I think the benefits are very clear. There's no doubt about the importance of finding ways to engage with local capacities. The constraints are also huge, which is why my balance is out of balance. I mean, there are very many constraints, kind of practical ones, complexity being one of them. Disasters are very, very complicated. I think the point again from the previous presentation, they're extremely fast moving, so not necessarily a conducive environment to capacity building, which tends to be a longer term process. Takes time building trust, building relations, so the two don't easily go hand in hand. Access can be another constraint in terms of actually reaching local people physically because of the impact of emergencies, but also the other way round in terms of local people being able to access international actors. We're not the easiest people to get contact with in many emergency situations. We hold meetings in places that other people can't easily attend, or we hold them in a language that people don't understand. So there are lots of issues around access. And then also, I touched on it before, the method of communication that we're using. There's huge growth in the use of mobile technologies, for example, which works really, really well for a lot of people, is very valuable in emergencies, but it also excludes some. And similarly, the use of the internet. People's ability to access information on the internet can be it can be constrained by whether you have power, whether you have reliable internet access, but also the way in which you use internet. So again, in terms of things like arranging meetings, scheduling meetings, it may well work for people who are used to using those sorts of tools, but does it work for others? And then finally, at the top, a big constraint, and again, I think we heard a little bit about it in the previous presentation, is giving people the basic knowledge and information that they need to be able to kind of participate. So in terms of the All in Diary's position in that tower of constraints, there's a lot of that stuff that we can't do very much about. But in terms of the top two, around making access to information easier, making it available in a way that's understandable, and that people can cope with, given the complexity. This is the area that we've really focused on. And then also in terms of communication, really trying to think about the way in which people locally source and can use information. So that's just to give you a bit of a background on what the drivers were in getting us started. And now I'm going to hand over to Linda, who can tell you a bit more about what we're about.
Thank you. Can I just ask, how many of you have already heard about All in Diary? Show of hands? Okay, so yeah, some have, some haven't. Yeah, okay. That can be part of our problem. So that's a backdrop. And so in 2006, having worked together in Sri Lanka and looked at some of these challenges, Gill and I decided to set about addressing 3 key questions. What is it that people need to know in an emergency? What is the essential information for an effective humanitarian response and engaging in that? How can you access that information in the middle of an emergency? We already heard from Gill, there's a lot of constraints about just getting access to information. And then a third one was, how can everyone have access to the same information? Because one of the things we wanted to avoid was to produce information that was targeted just to national workers or targeted just to international workers. There's all this talk about collaboration and coordination, but in order to do that, you need a common understanding. So we really, really wanted to make sure it was the same information that was relevant to anybody who was responding to an emergency. So how have we got on with those 3 questions over the last 10 years? What do people need to know in emergency? Well, we did our research at the beginning and we came up with this format. We have one A5 page for every topic across the humanitarian sector. At the moment, I think we're at 78 pages. Yeah? We have taken all the information that's out there. This says disaster cycle, but there's one on health, there's one on nutrition, there's one on common humanitarian standard. We take all the information and we put it as concisely as we possibly can onto one A5 page. As Gill's already said, it's concise. It's about, people kept saying to us in Sri Lanka, said, don't give me a manual to read, I haven't got time, just give me 10 things I need to do today and tomorrow tell me another 10 things. So short, concise information seemed to be really, really key. And then if you do need to know more, at the bottom of every page, we reference the most up-to-date and relevant resources, other people's resources, and the best websites. So if you do have access to the internet, if you do have access to electricity, computers, etc., you can get those. So it's like a portal of information. But being concise and producing checklists was really, really key. We also reckon that there's no point in having out-of-date information, so we kept it up to date. And this is our timeline, and you'll see that every 2 years we update it. We do a full update, and we have just the 1st of January launched our 5th edition. And you've got sample pages. Feel free to look at those, and you can take the sample pages with you. Or you might have the latest edition. If you really fancy having that, then talk to us, because they cost money to print. So, being concise and having key information across the whole sector, all the topics, keeping up to date. But the other thing that's really important is to try and make sure it's contextualised. What I've talked about is generic information, and that's important in terms of standards. But ideally, you would want it that it was contextualised to exactly what Jan was talking about. There's a different kind of crisis happening in Europe and in Syria at the moment. We've managed to 3 times do contextualised versions: in Sri Lanka in 2008, in Zimbabwe 2009, Pakistan 2011. It's not that difficult to contextualise them, but it is quite challenging getting funding, getting support, then getting them distributed and out there. So it takes a lot of resources that we've had to be aware of. So we're aware of the importance, but it's actually been quite difficult to do it more often than we've been able to. So that's in terms of what we feel people need to know in an emergency. We have had a lot of very positive feedback about the format and the content of the All-In Diary. When we regularly get unsolicited comments, emails from people saying, I've worked in many countries where people are not aware of many of the basic standards. It's a really, it's a great help. World Vision, who we've worked with recently, they took our pages and used our pages in their internal document, which showed them basically they were saying, well, you've done all the hard work, can we then just use that? So the format, the way in which we condense it, seems to be appreciated. Recognises field staff are extremely busy and under pressure to perform quickly. The content and formatting provides easy access to key standards, approaches and resources. So do feel quite validated that the feedback we get is the content and the format is working, and we're getting good feedback about our 5th edition. What about the next question, which is how can they access information? Do any of you still use paper diaries? Yeah, good. Okay, especially in the field. One of the things, we have been really, really keen on sticking with paper. Yeah? And one of the things that we were told was, we realised that manuals get left on shelves in offices. So when you go out into the field, you don't take all your manuals with you in your briefcase. But most people, a high proportion of people still have a paper notebook or diary that they take with them, which is why it's called the All-In Diary. So you can take the information that you need as well as your notebook. And so when you're sitting at your meeting and somebody says something about HIV and AIDS or whatever, and you think, what does it mean to know about that? You can have a quick reference. So that's why it's in this format, and why we feel that paper is a really important element of it. But it's not just about that. We also have a website, and on the website, all the resources that we mention at the bottom of every page and all the web links are there. So we're a one-stop shop. Yeah? So you can go on the website, provided you've got internet access, provided you've got access to a computer, and you can get all the resources pulled together. So those are kind of key things around the accessing information. I'll just make sure I don't miss anything. Yeah, I will just show you. This was our 1st edition. Yeah? Now, there was a couple of reasons for that. One was we wanted something robust that you could keep taking into the field. And we also wanted it to be updatable. So we had an arrangement with Filofax, and we had these wonderful things. 400 copies went around the world. Yeah? But it just wasn't a long-term option. So, you know, we've tried various things. But in terms of access, we've got our website. And as Gill mentioned, we get a lot of pressure around how do we adapt to new technologies. Well, in the early days, we had one of these. When did you last use one of these, you know? That's the problem with some of the technologies, is which are the ones you invest in. So for now, we feel that it's really important to get paper versions on the ground when you're in the middle of emergency, you don't have access to computers and internet, but you have the backup of the portal of information on the website. And again, we've been having really good feedback that this is working, because we're getting more and more agencies asking to print the diaries. Our 5th edition's been out there for a month, and we've sold 1,000 copies, which is great. So I think we're getting enough kind of recognition that that's important, and we get increasing traffic to our website. I'm not saying it's perfect, you know, there's still challenges, but this is how we're going. Then the next one is, how can everyone have access to the same information? And you know, I've certainly sat in at meetings, and there's a lot of jargon talked, and you can see a real kind of divide between, you know, whether it's a pop-up NGO, whether it's national NGOs, government officials, UNHCR, you know, whatever. There can be a real kind of divide in terms of having access to information. And one of the key things is language, and we've actually been translated into 9 different languages, all been done on a voluntary basis. And only 3 of them did we actually instigate. So we proactively got French, Spanish, and Arabic. But the other ones have been done by individuals and organisations who've just seen a need. Translated information is really, really important. And we recognise that, but it is really difficult to keep up to date. And how do you choose which languages? You know, I mean, this has been being reactive rather than proactive. But we are currently, for our 5th edition, actively at the moment doing Spanish and French. And we're hoping to do Arabic. And then we're just trying to encourage other people to help us to get updates. So it's an ongoing, I mean, it's not just us that have that problem. It is difficult to try and keep every 2 years to get a number of translations updated. The other thing is to try and get in-country distribution. We want to get this information out there to everybody who's responding in the emergency. We don't want it to be just at headquarters. We don't want it to be just international staff. We want it really to get out there. And we're lucky that that's a range of countries where we know there have been physical copies there. But Zimbabwe is the only one where we, with funding from ECHO, actually went out and, working with a local partner, got copies printed and then distributed them as far as we could. So we were able to target government officials at a national level, local government officials, local and national NGOs, and really try to get to the grassroots, which is where we really felt that the information was going to be really valuable. In the other occasions, we've been working through an international NGO, and we can encourage, but we don't have the same control of that, and actually we often don't know where they go and who gets them. But getting them out there to the people that are really working on the ground is a challenge. On the occasions when we can't get them, or we don't know how to get them physically there, we do an email promotion. It particularly worked well in Haiti and the Pakistani floods of 2010. And what we do is just, you go on the internet, you find as many relevant email addresses, and we send a link to the website. Sometimes we send the PDF of the information. And we're trying to do that again at a range of levels. We're trying what are the relevant government officials and what are the relevant NGOs that are working in the country. And sometimes that can be very effective. We can see from our website that there's increased traffic from there. But I found that with Nepal it was really difficult. We were getting an awful lot of bounce backs. So some places are easier than others. And we don't have a lot of capacity. It's very time consuming really to be able to do it. So those are ways in which we're trying to promote and get more, you get it out there basically. But it is challenging, yeah? I mean, I do think we've been playing our small part in supporting the engagement on involvement of local stakeholders, local responders. And also been playing our part at getting international staff, well-informed professional approach. It's a small part, but part of a big, sort of movement. But our key challenges are, how can we get increased awareness? There was a small proportion of people who've heard it. How do we get that out there? How do we get a better response when there are emergencies? Like, we're talking about what was happening in Greece and the response in Europe at the moment. How can we support these pop-up NGOs? Internal capacity. For the first several years, it was Gill and I. That was it. A lot of volunteer support and a lot of encouragement from some people who are in the room already. We now have 5 trustees. We're all pretty kind of hands-on, but that's it. We are not a big organisation. So it's a big constraint. But for me, one of the big things is we don't actually know how it's being used. Just yesterday, I got an email from someone saying, yeah, the IRC people in South Sudan love the all-in diary they've got. So, great, didn't know it was there, And I keep saying, tell me, how are you using it? And we just can't get the evaluation, can't get the feedback. We've evaluated what we can, but it's challenging. So it's difficult to know how best to improve. So that is a kind of, that's what we've been doing over the last 10 years to try and address this problem. We've got some questions that we'd like to ask you, but can I just check? Any questions from anyone from the floor?
Where do you get your funding?
We get our funding from selling copies of the physical. So you can buy this online, and we get a small profit, for want of a better word, for each one that's sold. And we also sell licenses. So, for example, in Nepal, Save the Children bought a license, and we gave them the PDF, and they then printed up to 2,000. So we sell licenses to print. That's it.
No donor funding.
No donor funding. We're a little bit tricky because we're tiny, so we haven't had enough money through our books. We're also, we're not very sexy because we're not actually helping the beneficiaries. We're helping the people who are helping the beneficiaries. They just don't want to know it. And it's not, we don't just do Africa or just do Asia. We're global. We'll do whatever. And they don't like it, really. So, any other questions? If you've got suggestions and ideas, yes.
Why did the phone effects go?
Why? It was, we got mixed results. Men liked it much more than women. And Halifax were not quite as generous with their reduction as we needed them to be. It was just going to be more challenging to do that. So we ended up, I'm going down the let's make it easy and you can almost put it in the pocket. But it's a nice, interesting question. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, I've got a couple of questions from you. Now, if we're kind of running out of time, then if you have got suggestions, you could always just write on the flip chart. But particularly those of you who have not heard of us at all before, what do you think? It doesn't even have to be strengths. Anything strike you about All-in Diary? Does it seem like a good idea? A bit crazy?
It just occurs to me from the first presentation that there's a huge opportunity here to inform pop-up NGOs. Have there been any efforts to promote the All-in Diary to them, or what is your vision for how that could contribute to a lot of well-meaning people who are less informed?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly have gathered some ideas in my head tonight. I don't know whether in the training that you did, Perry, was there any kind of mention of resources, not just All-in Diary, but resources like that?
Yeah, a copy of All-in Diary was there. We talked about it.
Yeah. So yeah. I mean, but part of the problem is the paper copies. They cost money. It's £10 to buy it online because it costs money. However, on the website you can download it all for free. What you don't get is the diary bit that you can tuck under your arm. But all the information, it's free access, open access. In an ideal world, we would love it all to be, but you have to cover those kind of costs. Yeah.
Yeah, I've often been dropped into emergencies where I've had to take on national staff very quickly who may or may not have any experience at all. I think that would be absolutely perfect because you're trying to do on-the-job training.
Yeah.
Give them the UNHCR manual for emergencies. They might use it to prop the desk up, but they're never going to read it or learn it. And that would be absolutely fabulous. And most of the people I work with in Africa and Asia, Myanmar in particular, would love to have something like that. It's a sexy document in that respect. I think it's immensely valuable as a sort of backup, short-term stopgap, long-term aid memoir.
Yeah.
But have you talked to HAP? Because they might be.
Yes, and they always, whenever we do our updates, we always do a peer review. So we send them out to the relevant organisations, and HAP have been quite closely involved with our accountability pages.
See a symbiosis there where you can support your dissemination of them.
Yeah, I think we're trying to look at as effectively as possible. The one caveat to that is I think one of our strengths is we're independent. We are, we're just so we don't have donors. So actually we're flight of foot, and so we can update it in a relatively short period of time without having to go through a whole committee process to get everything approved. So how we work with other organisations is interesting. But I think as time's going on, we're getting more and more recognised, and therefore there's some big organisations that are prepared to not endorse it. That would be absolutely a step too far, but to recognise it and tell people about it. It's quite an interesting challenge. Yeah. So, if you have any ideas on how we could get the message out there more quickly, more effectively, or any other suggestions, we are so open to them. And particularly on our lack of capacity, as you're having your last drink or whatever, if you want to stay in touch with us, just leave us a contact, because we just want to kind of expand our sphere of influence as much as possible. Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time. Thank you.